Hey, Joseph, what's happening?
Hey, bud.
Hey, there's no audio for that video clip you have going, by the way.
Okay. We are live. How's everyone today?
I'm good.
Good,
Tony.
Jay. How's it going, bud?
Uh,
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining our webinar here. Today, we are so honored to have Mr. Jay Sollenberger. Those of you who don't know Jay, Jay has he's played lead with Buddy Rich, Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, but he's mostly noted for his work with the band Chase, led by great trumpeter Bill Chase. Jay, we are so honored to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this, my friend.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and honor to be asked.
So Jay, why don't you give us a little bit about your background as far as how'd you get the horn in your hand? How'd you start and all that good stuff?
Well, third grade was when I started on cornet, and my father was a music educator at McPherson College. I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but I don't consider myself a Hoosier. But he moved the family to McPherson, Kansas, and so ever since I was 2 years old, I grew up in my mom teaching piano in the house and my dad playing violin, and I went to his band rehearsals. And I was fascinated with the sound of the trumpet. And so he brought home one of the college-owned cornets in third grade. And I started taking private lessons with Irvin Wagner, who was also from McPherson. Irvin is quite well known as a trombone teacher. He got his doctorate at Eastman School of Music. And he's still teaching, if I'm not mistaken, at Norman, Oklahoma, and has one of the world's largest trombone choir. And he does something fascinating. He can play the trombone and the spoons at the same time. And how he does, he takes his shoe and sock off and moves the slide with his toes and plays the spoon. And he got a novelty act that he travels around with symphony orchestras. And Bill Hartman, who used to teach at Southwest Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri, saw the act live once. And his response to it was, "I can't believe it. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen, but you have to ask yourself why."
That's funny.
But that was my upbringing in McPherson, and I had a wonderful junior high band director named Les Sperling, who was a military man, also a trombone player, and he marched the band in an annual May Day parade, and we played Swinging on Parade. And by this time, I had switched from cornet to trumpet. And then in high school, I had a trumpet teacher who was a band director named Bryce Ludy, who taught 13 years in McPherson, 3 of those for me in my sophomore, junior, and senior year. He introduced me to the music of Stan Kenton, and we actually went to hear the band. This was back in 1967 and 68, and we heard him in Manhattan, Kansas, and we heard him in Wichita. And there was a Barry sax player named Earl Dumler on the. This is about the time of the D. Barton albums, jazz compositions of D. Barton, which featured the trumpet work of Jay DeVersa. And of course, now Jay's son is well known in the trumpet work. So I was introduced to Stan Kenton in high school, and then I went to college at Wichita University and studied with Walt Myers, and he did a good job with orchestral training, but they didn't have a jazz program. And so I was working with pianist Newton Graber on weekends and playing dances on weekends. And we'd have brass choir on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we got the idea to add saxes and rhythm to brass choir on Thursdays. And that's how Wichita got their jazz program started. And back then we couldn't say the word jazz in the music building, but
it's a 4-letter word.
But now everything's fine. They have a fine jazz program now. Then 2 years there, and I went to North Texas State and played in the 2 o'clock. I auditioned as lead player in the 2 o'clock, and Ashley Alexander was the director of the 2 o'clock band. And this is before he recorded all his wonderful stuff. With Frank Mantooth arrangements. And then the 1 o'clock band had John Thomas playing lead trumpet, and you know him because he still teaches at USC, I think.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, John was playing lead in the 1 o'clock, and a guy named Dave Kelly decided he'd leave school halfway between the semesters in the fall. And so I got to play. There was a shortage of trumpet players, if you can believe that. That's not unheard of today at that time. And so I had to play jazz in the 1 and lead in the 2 at the same time. And that's probably the only time that's ever happened down there. But it was a lucky thing for me because it got me two idioms going for myself. And there's a funny story. I'll tell you how green I was down there. I was in the middle of a trumpet break, beginning a solo, and I folded the time, and it derailed the whole band. And John Thomas turns to me and says, "You know what you just did? You just folded the whole band."
John, yeah, that sounds like John.
That's John. And but I learned a lot playing with him because he was a great player. He could also play drums, and then of course about this time, I got offered to play on the road with a group from Lawrence, Kansas, which traveled the Midwest ballroom circuit. This group called the Fabulous Flippers. And they get their name from, back then, we noticed what the cars that would go by would either have baby moons on their hubcaps or flippers. And that's how that band came. But it was a rhythm and blues group, and it had 2 trumpets and a trombone. And we did this arrangement of West Side Story and MacArthur Park and all
Oh,
this
wow.
pop tunes. And some of the guys that I had been in the brass choir with at Wichita were also in the Flippers before I was, and they recommended me for the Flippers. And then later on, 2 of those guys went on the road with Chase during a non-recording period. And when they left, they recommended me to Chase. And so that's how I got from college, from beginning to junior high, through high school, through college, to North Texas, and on the road. And my first experience with a big time band that had a hit at the time. Their hit single was, Chase's hit single was Get It On. And
Yeah.
they tried several times to follow it up, and they never could catch fire like Get It On did, you know?
Yeah. I got to try, if I could ask you a few questions. Okay. So let's back up just a little bit. What kind of player were you? Like, were you always a first chair player? Were you always that kind of?
Yeah, I played most of the lead and most of the jazz in high school, but my band teacher was hip enough to throw the parts around a little bit. And he was also into loyalty. Like, as a sophomore, I was 3rd chair. As a junior, I was 2nd chair. As a senior, I was 1st chair. And so I had to work my way up the ladder. And I did the same thing later on the road. You know, I played with Stan Kenton after Chase. And like I say, by that time, one band led to another. And each band was a stepping stone to the next band.
Right.
And I played 2 years under John Harner's lead playing as a 2nd player. And then when he left, I took over the lead chair. But while I was still playing 2nd, he introduced me the teaching techniques of Carmine Caruso.
Oh,
And
cool.
I know you're familiar with that because you studied with Laurie Frink, and Laurie was a huge Caruso disciple.
Right.
And
So let me ask you again. So you're at North Texas. Was Dan Hurley running the program then?
Dan Hurley was actually at Manhattan University. Manhattan, Kansas State University, Manhattan. He was part of the faculty trio there. And Rick Stitzel, who has written some music and got it published in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, is a teacher at a small college down there. Rick was a student and he's from Arkansas City originally. Yeah. And while I was at North Texas, I met Rick Stitzel, who was married to Martha Benton at the time, and Matt Benton had run Benton's music store in Manhattan, Kansas, and they had a rehearsal hall in the store there. And so when we do a week-long summer high school camp, the faculty would have rehearsals there and play jazz, and led by Matt Benton. And Matt was the educator who talked Stan Kenton into doing the summer clinics in the summer, the week-long camps.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to know the Benton family, and they, Rick Stitzel and Martha are now divorced, and they have an adult son, but he never remarried. And I think she ended up teaching high school music in the north side of St. Louis, and I think she still lives in St. Louis now. But
so I was going to say, so can you tell us? So you're doing this gig with the Flippers. You're earning your stripes. You're earning your reputation. Now you get the call for Bill Chase. What was the audition like? Can you tell us what the audition for that band was like?
First of all, there's no audition. You just are recommended from one player to another, and then they try you out for about 2 weeks, kind of like they would do at North Texas.
Yeah.
They would audition you, and then they'd try you switching chairs and see whether you're better as a jazz player or a lead player. And then I was hired to be a lead player of a 3-man trumpet section that would back Bill Chase up as a soloist. But the way Bill would write, he would write 8 bars of lead for himself. Then the second player would take over lead. Then the third player would take over lead, all in the 8-bar phrases, well written. So the top 3 voices and even some fourth trumpet lead, we all got to play some lead and we all got to share in the solo work. So it was really a band that featured everybody.
Yeah.
And in the original band featured different players on vocals too.
Oh yeah, I saw that. So I'm trying to figure. I mean, you're in one of the, and you're, for all of us, who are big fans, have been influenced by Chase, myself included. You're in this band that every trumpet player in the world wants to be in, and so you're about 20, 21, 22, maybe.
1973 was when I joined the Chase band. I was 23 years old because I was born in 50. It's kind of easy to keep track. But you got to remember, even back in 68, that's when the band was first formed.
Oh, wow.
And they would play Get It On and nobody would dance to it. And then it became a hit on the radio and people would dance to it. So the airplay on the radio made that band successful. It wasn't, even though Bill was a fantastic writer and trying for that hit, he was very lucky that he was successful with that one hit. They just weren't able to follow it up with a second hit. And all the other albums that followed were great musical composition and amazing writing for instrumental music. In fact, Chase had 3 audiences. They had an audience of trumpet players. They had an audience of popular music fans from the hit tune. And then they had Woody Herman fans who remembered Bill Chase as a player with Woody Herman back in the mid-60s with that wonderful band that had Phil Wilson and Sal Nistico and Jay Canna in the band. And Bill would write for that band too. And so you could see the similarity in his writing for Woody there was a similarity in his writing for Chase, and that's what people would notice,
So Jay, can you tell us what your first week was like? Because that's going. North Texas, that's your proving ground, but can you help us debunk the myth? It wasn't just 4 guys playing as loud as they possibly can. You had to be a very fine player to be in that band.
You had to be strong enough to play lead.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have endurance, by playing every night, you would get a little bit further and you would build it up. In fact, we would organize 5-month tours twice a year. And before each tour, we'd rehearse for 4 or 5 days, almost a week, not quite a week, 4 or 5 days of rehearsing, both afternoon and evening. And there was one rehearsal that the original band was in Vegas, but then he moved to Chicago, and he lived, I think, on the 23rd floor of a high-rise apartment building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And that's in April of 73. That's when I hooked up with him. And we rehearsed at Universal Studios in Chicago. And one morning we'd been up all night rehearsing 8 hours. And at 8:30 the next morning, here we are still going, just totally wiped out.
Wow.
And Bobby Lewis, who was first call studio player, and a bunch of guys walked in at 8:30 to warm up for the 9 o'clock session. So that was the worst rehearsal we ever had. But Bill was he just felt like being crazy that one night, so you never knew what he would do. Sometimes he would fall off, sometimes he'd doit up, and he taught me to play really short notes short, and he taught me to have the feeling of a fall off and add some dirt to it. Not really a fall off, but a dirty short note with the feeling of a fall off. He taught me that style, which he used that style with his lead playing in Woody Herman too. I learned from him. Another thing he taught me was not to overblow the lead player. He was very sensitive about the second player not playing too loud, and so I was careful to be just underneath him, and Stan Kenton once told me that when I started out as second, that what makes a great trumpet player is a great second trumpet player.
Right.
They have to learn to work together, match each other's sound, and work together so that one doesn't. So they're not competing. They're communicating. You know.
Right. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit, because I've got a million questions about the Chase band, but I'm gonna try to get you to answer maybe some of them in our dialogue here. Like, you have four amazing trumpet players, all that could do that. You all played good jazz, you all played good lead, and but can you talk about the chemistry between all four of you? Because there's this definite chemistry that.
Yeah. We all liked each other. We were all from the Midwest. Three of those musicians. See, when I was there, it was Joe Morrissey, and he was a former high school music teacher. And then it was and he was older than the rest of us, but he played third. And then Jim Oates was just almost ready to graduate from college, and his father was a high school band director. His father was not happy with him not finishing his degree, and so he said to him, well, you're on your own if you do this.
Yeah. Wow.
And it turned out to be the right thing, because we all got. Jim Oates is one of my best friends, and he and I communicate verbally, and we're all good listeners. He's the anchor of the trumpet section. He's got the big low sound, and he's the anchor, and the rest of us are, and he's capable of playing lead, but he's a good anchor, a good solid low part player. And but the way Chase wrote, he wrote everybody up and down. And so sometimes Bill would, we overdubbed parts, and there was one time where Bill overdubbed a fourth part for himself in octaves, and he played out of tune with himself on a recording.
Wow.
It was on an F, and he played a low F and a high F out of tune with himself. And it's okay because it had that pizzazz, it had that edge, because it was just slightly sharp,
Yeah. And so, you guys, you have these, like I said, you have these four amazing guys. You have, then you're led by one of the best trumpet players in the country, in the world at that time. And, so, can you tell me how did that, you're on the band for what, 3 years?
No, Chase was about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
About a year and a half.
Yeah. And then, like I said before, we'd go out for 5-month tours and take 6 weeks off at Christmas time and in July. And then before each tour, we'd have 4 or 5 days of rehearsal, usually a 3-hour rehearsal maybe, or a 4-hour rehearsal. Not a lot, but the average length of rehearsal. And most of that was just to learn the music, and sometimes it would be learning new music. In fact, he started getting more into odd meter towards the end. There was a lot of new stuff that he had written that never got recorded. It was unfinished. Mm-hmm. And then the tragic plane crash happened. So, and we had a whole successful college concert tour booked. If we could have just got over that summer hill, we could have coasted for another half year of successful gigs, but bad weather caused several missing planes that night. And we found out the next morning that half the band had perished in a plane crash, and they tried to land short of the runway, which was in Jackson, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Just north of Lake Okoboji, Iowa.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you weren't on that flight, but you were
the
still
band,
in the band. You were still in the band, right?
3 guys from Des Moines,
Yeah.
and I was from Lawrence, Kansas at that time. And that's where the Flippers were based out of. So, but anyway, KU is University of Kansas is there. And then,
You've been in Houston.
oh yeah, we had just finished a wonderful gig at Houston, Texas at the Village Inn Pizza Parlor. It was a nightclub, and it had a stage, and it would bring rock bands in, and we played 10 days there. And we met Nelson Hatt there. And Nelson Hatt, at the time, Woody Herman was looking for a trumpet player. And so we recommended Nelson to Woody Herman. So Nelson went with Woody for 4 years. And then and then I went with Stan Kenton for 3 years.
Mhm.
And then Nelson recommended me on to join Woody's band back in 1977. So I got to hook up with Nelson again. This time I was playing lead and he was playing second. So
That's cool. So
he helped me break into Woody's band, and just like John Harner helped me break into Stan Kenton's band. And we were all green and inexperienced. It was all in the Chase band. We were all trying to learn the music, and we were excited about traveling and playing with Bill. And we didn't really know that much, but we learned quite a bit about what to do and what not to do.
Right. So
Because every now and then Bill would like to go out to dinner before each gig, and he would come in just in time to make the first note. The band directors would be a little bit nervous as well. Is Bill going to show? Yeah, he'd always show, but he liked to cut it close. Fun before the job, you know.
So can you tell us, and again, I got a 1,000 questions here, but can you tell us, what was Bill like? What was he like as a guy?
He was a nice guy. He was from Boston, and his real name was William Chiazza, and it was spelled something like Chiase or something like that. I'm not sure, but and he was obviously Italian, and his parents. While I was with Woody, his parents sent Woody a Christmas card, and said, "To the old road father," meaning how many people Woody had launched their careers, like Stan Getz and people all through his 50+ year history of being a band leader.
Yeah.
But that's how the Road Father album got the name.
Oh, cool.
From Bill Chase.
So I heard
he was a nice guy. He was mellow. He seemed like a mellow Midwesterner, even though he was from Boston, you know. But he liked the Midwest attitudes, and all of us were easygoing. We got along with everybody, and we had fun when we played.
Yeah.
And we respected each other, you know. And we were good listeners, and and we were all strong players. But when you get to play with somebody every night, you learn what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are, and you learn to write. He learned to write for everybody's strength. He knew what my range was, and so he would try to push me just one note above that.
Yeah.
And
wow.
then by the end of the tour, I was almost there.
So I heard he was also very generous. He was a very generous individual.
Well,
that's what I heard.
Yeah, I was. We got a pretty good salary. We were making about $300 a week.
Wow,
which was big money back then, because
the
Kenton band was only making $225 a week back when we were making. And then John Harner talked Stan into raising the second trumpet player from $225 to $250. So I started playing second trumpet with Stan at $250. And then when I went to Woody Herman 3 years later, I asked for $300, and that was good money at the time. Everybody else was making about $250. And when I got to Buddy's band in 1980, I was making $400. And I think some of the other cats were making $450, but who had been out, longer than I had. But that was your average salary of road bands back then. It wasn't that great.
And you had to pay your own expenses, right? You had to pay your expenses.
It was Stan would pay part of the hotels.
Yeah.
And Bill would pay all the hotels.
Oh.
So we stayed at a hotel in Chicago when we were rehearsing, and Bill paid for the hotels. And so that's how generous he was.
Yeah. That's great. So let me ask you, so the unthinkable happens, Bill leaves you, and so you're with Stan Kenton, you're with John Harner, and you're with Kenton for 3 years. Am I correct?
2 years as second trumpet with John Harner, and then 1 year as lead trumpet. And John recorded Send in the Clowns. And then 2 years later, I got to play it, and that would be the first tune that we played each night.
Oh, wow.
And that went up to a high A flat. So I had to warm up using my Caruso, which John Harner taught me. carefully, and so I could make sure that I had that note to play in the first tune, you know, and then so that was hard. And I remember when I was in high school and I saw the Kenton band in Wichita, Stan would say to the audience, just give us a few tunes to get warmed up, and then we'll get into something with some substance.
So I got one question. So what was the transition like going from Chase to Ken? Because they're the same, but they're different. I mean, the it's demanding as a player, but
physically, all the bands were similar. As a lead player, the physical demand on the lead trumpet, and when I was with Woody, I played 90% of the lead, and when John Harney was with Kenton, he played at least 90, maybe 95% of the lead.
Yeah.
You know, and then everybody else had some lead, but most of it was either split between the first and second players. And back in the 80s, after I'd left Woody's band, they actually went for a while with a 60-40 split with two lead players, first and second chairs. And by then you had players like Ron Stout and Roger Ingram and a couple guys before Roger. And that's where they started that 60-40 split. And I think when Roger was with them, he took a lot of it back, played most of it when he was there. But and then the writing was really hard. I mean, Frank Tiberi wrote a really hard tune of, what were they doing? They were doing Congo, which was popularized by the Miami Sound Machine. And then Frank wrote a tune that John Coltrane recorded it. And I can't remember the title of it. One word begins with the letter C.
So is it Central Park West?
No, that's a ballad. This was a faster tune. I'll think of it later. But John Fedjock was writing, and he wrote really hard. And you know, just like who's the piano player that Wayne Bergeron? Wayne Bergeron is the big band, the piano player that writes. He writes for
Gordon Goodwin.
Yeah, Gordon Goodwin. He writes for. I'm sure my mind's going blank here. The great lead trumpet player in California. What's his name?
Wayne Bergeron.
Wayne Bergeron. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he writes for Wayne, and only Wayne can play those parts. And John Fedjock would write for Roger Ingram the same way. You know.
Yeah.
My job was to fill those shoes. I mean, I took Al Vizuti's place, and Vizzuti and I recorded 3 albums where we had a 50-50 split in the recording studio. But then we went on the road. I had all of it at 90, but we were recording 6 hours a day, 2 sessions. And so we really needed 2 lead players to split it up to get through the recording. And Woody did that. He did that with John Thomas. And John Thomas actually was one of the youngest lead players at age 22 that ever played lead with Woody Herman. He brought in Al Persino to do the Raven Speaks album, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that album had Alan Broadbent's composition Reunion at Newport, which was one of my favorite tunes in the Woody Herman library.
Yeah. So out of all with Bill, with Stan, with Woody, with Buddy, you know, which band changed you the most as a player?
Each one changed me a lot. Each one was a tremendous experience, different styles of music. Chase had his style of playing, and you could hear it in the middle 1960s band of Woody Herman and Jake Hanna on drums, really on top of the beat. And then, of course, you listen to Buddy Rich, he'd be really on top of the beat, really aggressive. And then you hear the Basie band. I didn't play with Basie, but you hear the Basie band play You Gotta Try at a slower tempo, and everything's on the backside of the beat, right? It's not frantic, but it just grooves more relaxed and more laid back. It's still aggressive, but it's totally different style. So Bill was really into playing on top of the beat and writing, challenging everybody and making all the parts interesting for everybody. And you know, so, but they all had really hard lead books. I mean, if you look at some of these recordings that Eric Shero has done, he played Bill's parts on some of these reunions that we did. The first reunion was recorded in St. Paul, Minnesota, at the Minnesota Music Cafe, and there were 500 people that showed up from all across the country, and it was a great event. And Eric played incredible, and we hadn't played this music in 30 years, and we had forgotten. We were young and in shape back and foolish at the time we did all this. And now, and everything back then was exciting and higher, louder, faster. And of course, now that I'm 70 years old, I much prefer lower, slower, and softer. Back then we'd race to the bandstand to play first. Now we race to the bandstand to play fourth or fifth.
That's so cool. So you have this, like, and again, you have this career that a lot of trumpet players are a lot of trumpet players are just, that it's just a dream, to play with all these great bands and to do all this wonderful, play all this great music. So can you talk to us about what happens now? A lot of people think, and this is for the younger cats, Jay, and remember I told you this is more of for me, I'm more into the educational. Jay, you have, when you come back home to Kansas City, you have a huge name behind you. You have a huge name.
Yeah, but Kansas City's a funny place. It still took me two years to break into the scene. And even when I started breaking in, I was playing third trumpet or fourth or fifth. And maybe as a last minute sub, I could play some lead. I had to work my way up because those players were already established. They'd been doing this for decades. And I was just breaking in all over again. And there's a right and wrong way to break in. You have to break in politely. And, you kind of have to show up at the club and sit in and only play one or two tunes. Don't stay up there too long or they'll think you're hot dogging. Yeah. And then if you're going to sit in a rehearsal band, just play what they ask you to play. Don't show off. Just if it's a solo, play it musically. Don't play too much flash, and then if you have the right attitude, everybody's going to say, yeah, this guy's all right. And then you can work your way up. It took me several years just to move up from third to second to first. And then I got to do some Broadway shows, and you worked in Vegas playing shows. So the Broadway shows around here usually only last a week. Once in a while, 2 or 3. We did when Annie was popular, we did it for 7 weeks. And that year I made more money than I'd ever made as a professional trumpet player. And it was only 17,000 in 1 year. And so, and then the very next year I made 10,000. Next year I made 9,000. Next year I made 8,000. I said, oh, so this is how it's done.
That's great.
So you're not going to get rich playing music, but you're going to have a lot of fun playing with a lot of people who share your passion for playing together, and playing together involves listening more to everybody else than yourself, and making sure you blend in and you don't take over with too bright a sound or don't fit in with too dark a sound. So I use a Bach trumpet to get the darker orchestral settings, and I use a Colicchio trumpet if I'm playing lead, and I can get light and dark qualities out of both instruments. But it depends on who I'm playing with as to which instrument I choose. And it depends on which horn I've been playing the most as to what tells me what horn to choose, play with,
So Jay, you're like I said, you move your way up the ranks. Your first call in Kansas City, from what Stan told me, you've been first call for like the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I moved up to first call probably after 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And then we were doing some recording and playing a lot of Broadway shows and doing and playing lead in the bands, both small and large, small, medium, and large. And so I did that for a long time, but now when the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra, which is the group I'm playing with now, and I'm quite proud to be a charter member. This will be our 17th season. And Stan was a charter member in that when we started, but he started focusing more on his own groups. Sons of Brazil is a Latin group that he's really passionate about. And then he's done a lot of solo albums with different themes, but he's a great player. And by the way, I should thank him for putting me in touch with you, Joe.
Oh,
so
I thanked him already. I'm going to send him.
I'll give him a call. I'll give him a call. We hook up once in a while, and he's probably working as much as anybody in town with the jazz, with the jazz idiom. Hey, if you don't mind, I got to take a quick bathroom break, and I'll be.
That's okay. That's okay, guys. That's okay. That's okay.
This will only take 2 minutes.
That's okay, Jay. I totally understand. So all of you out there, I'm getting questions to ask Jay. So if you guys have any questions for Jay, and you know what, I'm going to do something I really haven't done in the past. I'm going to, so for some of you who are on the webinar who want to ask Jay a question, I'll go ahead and open the video feed. So you guys can face to face. If you guys want to do that, just let me know what question you have. And then we can go from there as soon as Jay gets back. This is kind of a first time I've had someone do this, so I don't really know what to do. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm learning so much from Jay. I mean, he's one of the greats. And, I look at this guys as, these guys are living libraries. And this is your chance to ask the book a question, and the book will talk to you back. So this is just a really great thing. And I just want to give I want to thank all of you for joining me. I know that it's a tough time right now, but it's great for some of us to just take a break and talk music and talk about, some of the things that brought us joy in our lives. So yeah, it's really cool, man. So Jay had to take a quick break, which is totally understandable. And just let me, I'm checking Facebook and I'm checking the room here. So if you have a question for Jay, please let me know, and I will make sure Jay gets your question and he answers it. There he is. All right. So
sorry about
no, that's okay.
You get to be 70, you have to do this more often.
No problem, my friend. That's totally cool. So Jay, if it's okay with you, can I start asking you some of the questions I got?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to accommodate you however you want. I hope we get to play together someday.
Oh, that would be amazing. Okay, Jay, this is from Charlie from New York City. He asks, hey, Jay, been a big fan of yours for many years. I would like to know who has the Chase book?
Oh, that's a good question. Because when the plane crash happened, the Ryder rental truck that had all the equipment got stolen 2 or 3 days after the crash. And everybody, we had our music memorized.
Yeah.
And at the time of the crash, Joe Morrissey had left the band, went back to Des Moines. Or actually, he went back to Minneapolis. He was from Des Moines originally, but he moved to Minneapolis. Let that go. Byron Lingenfelter, who was with the original band in Vegas, his wife was pregnant with their first child when Bill was rehearsing the band at the very beginning. And so he didn't get out. He didn't get to play. They rehearsed in his living room in Vegas with wire music stands at the very beginning before Get It On was even a hit. And then when the band went on tour, Byron didn't go on tour. So they had Ted Piercefield, Alan Ware from Wichita, Kansas, which is how I got on Chase. He's another recommendation of a fellow Kansan. And Byron kept his book, and Byron doesn't play anymore, but he still has his book. And he showed up at the reunion just to hang out. He didn't play, but he's the only guy that has the third trumpet book. we don't even know where the books are, where the music is, because the rental truck and all the equipment got stolen.
So it
So-
is theoretically, it's out there somewhere, right?
It's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Bill wasn't very organized with details like that, and he would, if he'd get a receipt, he'd just shove it in a drawer and then show up with all this paper. Whenever he did his income taxes, he had an
Yeah.
income tax guy in Chicago, and I used him for a while, and then the guy told me politely that I wasn't as big a star as he was, so he wouldn't be doing my income taxes anymore. So meanwhile, I found somebody else.
That's cool. So I got another question from Barry. Barry's from North Carolina. He says, Jay, big fan of Chase. I was wondering, Jay, you be the lead trumpet player of Chase and all those great lead trumpet players. What was the one thing that, in your opinion, what was the one thing that set that band apart from other trumpet sections like Maynard's trumpet section or Buddy's trumpet section? Because in my opinion, that is the trumpet section of all time.
Well, first of all, attitude is huge. We all got along, and Bill's writing, he made it interesting for all of us, and we were all good listeners. We knew how to match each other. We got along, and so those three things are huge. Speaking of attitude, if you want to check this out, there's a pastor from Texas. His name is Charles Swindoll, and in the 80s, I became familiar with the teaching techniques of Bill Adam, and he passes this paragraph from Charles Swindoll to his students. He says, "The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life." And then there's the paragraph, and it closes with, "I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes." So attitude can make or break anything. It can make or break a church. It can make or break a band. If the second trumpet player comes in trying to compete with the lead player, chances are they're not going to get along. And Bill was real sensitive to that. And I learned from him when to back off. You didn't play loud all the time. You would play loud. He would shape phrases with dynamics. And if you listen to all the great lead players like Al Pacino, Bobby Shue, or listen to the Basie Band. The Basie Band has a history of Paul Cohen used to play lead with the Basie Band. He was a studio player, but he would go out with the Basie Band just to recharge his batteries. That band could play softer than any band, and they would play 6 dynamic levels, and they would only play double forte about 5% of the time, and that would be at the peak of the shout. Yeah. And so even as loud as we were an electric rock band, but we were also a jazz fusion band. Bill acoustically would shape phrases and play certain notes short and style, and we would all blend in as a section, and he would write voices for the guitar and the organ, which would fill out what earlier in the 60s would have been the saxes and trombones, which gave us a foundation to shine.
Yeah.
And that was the anchor. So the way he wrote is probably the biggest part of why the band sounded so good. It wasn't just his playing, it was his writing too. And it was the fact that he could write for people that he knew what their capabilities were, and he wouldn't push them too hard, but he pushed them just the right amount. So a lot of great writers wrote with specific people in mind, like Duke Ellington wouldn't put first, second, or third trumpet on the part. They'd put the guy's name on it,
Yeah.
Like, whatever, Pat Anderson, or Cootie Williams. Yeah.
So I got another question. This is from Dave. He's actually from Florida. And Dave asks, he says, Jay, okay, I'm trying to read this correctly. Jay, when you were in Chase, Were you guys sponsored by a specific musical instrument company like Shoki, or what did everybody play the same type of horn, or did you guys just play your own stuff?
We played our own stuff, but Yamaha helped us out by sponsoring us with the flugelhorns. We played Yamaha flugelhorns. Bill played a Schilke trumpet, so Bill was sponsored by Schilke, and Yamaha sponsored our flugelhorns. I had a Benz trumpet, which was made. It was called the Claude Gordon model Benz trumpet. It was one of the best trumpets I ever owned, but it wasn't bright enough to blend with Bill's Schilke. But I also had a Getzen. I played a second trumpet with that Getzen, and the whole time I was with Chase. So it was Bill's Schilke and a Getzen, and I later sold that Benz to Jim Oates, and then he later sold it to somebody else. And I asked him, "What happened to that Benz?" And nobody knows. So we all played our own, and then Joe Morrissey had a Schilke with a large bell.
Yeah.
And then when Dennis Dotson on Woody's band played a Buck, but I played a Colicchio, and Bill Byrne played a Bench, and Glenn Drews played a Buck, and all these horns. And I asked Dennis one time, I said, do you like Colicchio trumpets? And I was playing a Colicchio at the time. I switched when I was with Kenton. I switched to when I played lead. I switched from Getzen to Colicchio. Yeah. And I asked Dennis, "Do you like Colicchio trumpets?" And he said, "I like sitting next to him."
That's great. So I have another question from Derek Young. Derek says, "Okay, I have a question. How did you stay within good graces of Buddy, assuming you were able to pull that off?"
Well, nobody's really able to pull that off. We had this conversation once before.
Yeah.
Andy Fusco, the lead alto player, was out for 3 years, and he was fired 14 times. And you told me that Bobby Shue was fired 26 times. And I said,
wow, like that.
And off and on, you know, and then, but with Buddy, it was like a contest. And if you came on the band for the second time, Buddy, first thing Buddy would say to you was, "Did I fire you, or did you quit?" So anyway, I didn't like it. I didn't like him yelling and screaming. I loved the music. The band was fantastic, and his drum solos were unbelievable. And in fact, there's a funny story I told you earlier, how we were doing this 3-movement suite by Bob Mincer called Good News, and it ends at the end of the third movement with a drum solo and a coda. Well, so does West Side Story, and so does Channel One Suite. 3 movements. The middle movement's usually a ballad, and then there's the third movement, which is faster. And one night we're playing Channel One, and the count off after the drum solo to Channel One is in 4. The count off to the coda in West Side is in 3. So here we are, 3 movements and the drum solo into Channel One, and he counts off the coda to West Side Story. We actually did this one night. Oh, wow. 3 movements and a drum solo of Channel One, followed by the coda to West Side Story. And after that, all of us looked at each other and said, "I can't believe we did that." And I wish we'd recorded it, but we didn't record it because that would be on the internet if it would ever record it. You know, that was Buddy find himself $20, puts $20 bill in the well of the bus, left it there for 3 days and took it down.
Now, here's another question. This is a very good question, by the way. At least I think it's a very good question. Jay, what was the one thing Bill Chase did to really influence your playing? Was there one thing Bill Chase did to influence you playing?
That's an excellent question. And I think the fire that he had, when I was in college, I listened to the band in the 60s. And while I was at Wichita before I went to North Texas, and the fire that he had in his playing would spark the band like nobody else. And Lynn Biviano had that same kind of fire. And Maynard Ferguson had that same kind of fire. In fact, if you listen to the recording that Stan narrates from 19, I can't remember, or early 52. It's got to be because Maynard left the band in 1952.
Yeah.
But he says, we're happy. He introduces Maynard, says, we're happy and lucky that we have somebody like him that can create great feelings of fire.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that would, This is an Orchestra prologue. That's the album I'm talking about. But anyway, Maynard had it. Chase had it. Probably any great lead player that had a little sizzle in their sound, and an aggressive way of playing on top of the beat, that would spark the band, and that was exciting. And that's that I learned to play that way by playing second to him. And then I was able to use that later because Stan Kenton was such a different style. Stan was very clean about releases and ensemble, no vibrato. And so after 3 years of no vibrato, I hear all of a sudden I'm on Woody's band, and Woody says, it needs more schmaltz like Conrad Gazzo. But see, Conrad played in some of Woody's earlier bands.
Yeah.
And then of course, famous studio player, you know. So and then the fact that he could also improvise and write all these things and playing next to him was exciting because he's experienced and I'm a young pup, you know.
Yeah.
and so that was my first training into the big time, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah. So I got another question. This is from Keith. Keith is out of Seattle, and Keith's asking me, Jay, how many unreleased tunes did Chase record but never released?
Well, because they were unfinished, there were still tracks left to put on.
Yeah.
And so everything that was recorded, to my knowledge, and finished was released.
Okay.
But these that were unfinished were still in a sketch and rehearsal. Although we rehearsed in a studio, we didn't really record them.
Okay.
So we were just kind of getting used to what was to come, and we were excited that he gave us an idea. He gave us an idea of what was to come, and we saw it in sketch form. So,
oh wow, cool. That's really cool. Okay, this is from Bobby. Bobby's out of Chicago. Bobby's asking, Jay, who is your biggest influence as a player?
Well, early on, Doc Severinsen was a huge influence. And then later I learned to appreciate Miles Davis. And later I learned to appreciate Clifford Brown. And then as far as lead players go, Al Persino, Bill Chase. Oh man, I could start. I mean, Clark Terry was a huge influence on just about everybody as a jazz player, because one of the hardest things to do in jazz is to create your own voice. I mean, a lot of us are influenced and sound quite like this guy, like Sam Noto was big too. Sam Noto played lead and jazz, and anybody like Bobby Shue that can play lead and jazz, and like Lou Soloff, all these cats are my idols, you know.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so I got another question. This is from John. John is out of Nebraska, and John's asking, Jay, did you ever, oh wow, this is a good question. Jay, in all of your professional career, with all of your accolades and everyone you play with, did you ever have self-doubt?
I still have self-doubt. And I was brought up with perfectionist parents. My dad, they wanted me to shovel the driveway off perfectly. They wanted me to mow the lawn perfectly. They didn't want me to miss any notes. They never punished me physically, but I was brought up perfectionist. And so I had that discipline. In fact, Bill Chase once said that I was a disciplined player. And I had to be because he liked to have so much fun. Somebody, as a soloist, we were back there getting tight, even though he was doing something different up there, you know?
Yeah.
So that discipline, and even though as green as I was, there was still some discipline. So Hey, I'm sorry, but I got to use the bathroom one more time. You'll probably never ask me to do this again.
No, it's okay, Jay. That's totally
Okay.
cool, man. Totally cool. This is great. So I apologize, guys. So Jay has to step out for a second. And again, I want to thank everybody who's watching this webinar. Keep the questions coming in. Jay's more than happy to answer your questions. He's a great cat, and he's just a walking library, a living walking library of information. I'll see if I can get him to tell you the story about when it was Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson, and Louis Belson all on the same card, and he was there that night. And so I'll get him to tell that story real quick. That's an amazing story. So I'll take this time and don't sorry. Remember, we have another webinar coming this Sunday, and our guest will be Mr. Peter Olstad. And Peter has played with Maynard Ferguson, Buddy Rich, Juan Gabriel, Enrique Iglesias. He's one of the finest players in the country and one of the nicest cats you'll ever meet. And he has so much great advice for people, learning to improve their own skills. You might want to catch that. That is at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to go ahead and catch that this Sunday, we will have Mr. Peter Olstad. And then the following week after that, we will have Mr. Dan Finero. So that's going to be a great, so you won't want to miss that. And then, and so we'll wait for Jay to come back, and then we'll go from there. Again, keep your questions coming in. I mean, Jay's really, really open about answering questions. And like I said, I've never had a guest do this before. This is kind of a first time for me, so bear with me. And but hey, man, I can sit and listen to this guy all night. And want to thank you guys again. Jay, you're back.
I am back.
All right.
Sorry about that. I'm going to have a potted plant next to the bandstand on my next gig.
Okay. So I got another question. This is from my buddy Roger Wood in Los Angeles. He asked, Jay, do you know Phil Driscoll, and have you ever worked with him?
I know the name Phil Driscoll, and I don't believe I have ever worked with him, but remind me who he is.
Phil Driscoll is a gospel trumpet player. He's very famous. He's very famous in the gospel world. Oh. And so a very fine player. I think he's an Adams student too. I believe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
I'll have to Google some of his recordings, I guess, because I'm sure he's great. Anybody that's an Adams student is great, in my opinion, because for one, they have the right attitude, and Adams spends the right amount of time necessary as a great teacher. And I understand you're a great teacher. I can just tell. I can tell just talking with you, you're a great teacher and a great player, and would be fun to work with you sometime. But right now, work is kind of shut down.
Yeah. So this is for everybody at home, Jay. Can you remember the story you told me about the time it was Kenton, Maynard, Woody, and everybody on this? Can you tell me about that night? Who were you with, and what was that night like?
It was a jazz festival in the afternoon in the summer at Saratoga Springs, New York. There were 6 bands. There was Harry James, Count Basie, Buddy Rich, Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, and one other band, and I can't remember who the other band was, but we were all there listening. Each band played one set, and I was with Woody and Roger Homefield and probably either Bob Cozen or the guy from Wisconsin, Milwaukee. What was his name? You mentioned his name. Anyway, he was probably with Stan. And Stan played a great set, and Harry James followed him up the next. And before Harry even started his band, he said, "The band of the afternoon just played."
Oh,
And
wow.
it was a great tribute to the last band that Stan ever had. And I can't think who was playing lead trumpet back then. My good friend Denny Brunk who's passed away now, but he's my age, and he and I were in high school together, and we were on the Kenton band, and then later he was on Buddy's band, and then later he was on Harry James's band, and very successful trombonist in the Los Angeles scene after he got off of those bands. And he moved back to McPherson and decided he got tired of competing.
So
Because
yeah,
there's a lot of competition out there in the bigger cities, and the Midwest is competition, but more politely mellow. If I think, depending on certain attitude, again, is I'm really big about being polite and being nice. And I always tell players, young people, to learn to get a beautiful sound, learn to blend that sound with your neighbor, favoring your neighbor. And if your neighbor does that in return with you, then you melt together as one, and you have a beautiful blend. And that's all these great trumpet sections that I played in had that chemistry. We had that attitude. We had the camaraderie. My Jim Oates was wonderful. And I mentioned Glenn Drews was a wonderful player in the Woody's band who could play lead. He could play jazz. And Woody would play this lick and we called the lick the Thundering Bird. And whenever Woody would play it, Glenn would put a plunger on top of my shoulder and wiggle it like that. And whenever Woody would play that lick, and it was kind of a fun thing that Glenn just made it. He was a great player, but he had a great sense of humor and made it funny, made it fun for everybody,
Well, that's great. So here, this next question is from Elliot Deutsch. Elliot is out of the Los Angeles area. He's also a very fine composer. In my opinion, he is the next big major composer in Los Angeles. That's my opinion.
Does he write for films too?
I'm not sure. I'm sure he has, but he asked this question.
Phil, look at all these great writers who were part of the big band era who became film writers later on for movies, Lenny Niehaus,
And Lenny
Niehaus used to do all of Clint Eastwood's movies.
Yeah, Lenny just left us, I think, a day ago. So sad. But this question from Elliot says, Jay, how are you keeping busy during these COVID-19 times?
I'm busy taking care of my family. We have 2 grandchildren. I have a son who's 35, and he works with special needs children, and he's got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so we try to do some FaceTime with the grandkids and with our son and daughter-in-law. And then I am in contact with my parents. They're in 95 and 96, and they're in one of the assisted living facilities here in town, and they're in very good health. And so we're just kind of staying at home, cooking and listening to music, watching TV. And I try to practice a little bit, but basically my last gig was March 3rd, and that was with the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra. And from then on, the very next week, it's been shut down. And most of the symphony players are doing some kind of Zoom like this, where they're in smaller ensembles. And so they're talking now about resuming in smaller groups, which means they have to totally reorganize what music they're planning to play. And then I would suspect that the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra will do something like that. We've already done some small groups within the band virtually. And then, but practice, this is a time to practice and stay in shape. It's just like if you had an injury, or if you had some health issues, you go through it and you take the horn off your face for a while, and then you start building it back, and you build it back with short practice sessions followed by short rest sections, not pushing yourself, let the air do the work for you and all that. So we're trying to stay busy, and and then the work is scheduled for this summer, but I have a feeling it's not even going to happen in the fall. I think things are going to continue to get backed up. So things right now are in the second phase of restarting churches and restaurants, which means it used to be 10 capacity. Now it's 50. Everything's spaced 6 feet apart, you know. So when we go out to the grocery store, we wear a mask. And when we practice, I try to make sure that I spray a certain direction so that I'm not spraying where my wife travels.
Yeah, gotcha.
When we're riding in a car, we try to roll the windows down and, you know, and just try to be aware of it, you know.
I got
It's the only thing that's going to save us.
Yeah, I got a small comment from Jim German. He says, "Say hello to Jay for me with my regards." So we talked about Jim.
Tell him right back at him. It was great to work with him for the short time that we did, and to know that he's an accomplished repairman with a lot of people's respect in the Phoenix area. That's terrific. So he found his calling for sure. You know, my son was going to be an actor, and he went to New York, and then he found his calling working with special needs kids right here in town. So we sent him to New York, and then he came right back in less than a year.
I was going to ask you. So Jay, like I said, I got tons of questions. I'm just going to the stuff that you haven't covered yet, hopefully. This is oh wow, this is from Brittany. Brittany's a studio trumpet player out of Minneapolis. Very fine player. She asked how long did it take you to memorize the Chase book?
Well, we had wire the first 2 weeks on the band that we went on tour. We had wire music stands, and we were at a club called La Bastille in Houston. And that's where Nelson Hatt was. I met Nelson there, and he later helped me get on Woody's band. We helped him get on Woody's band. But at La Bastille, after 2 weeks, Bill started taking the music away. Here I am playing, reading the music. He starts taking the music off my stand, and I had no choice but to learn it.
That's great.
So basically had to memorize. He was telling us, okay, you've had 2 weeks to memorize it. Get going. But he made it fun and funny. Like my first week on Woody's band, we were playing Caledonia. It has some real fast plungers, doo-wahs thing, and I couldn't figure it out. And I looked at Woody, and he's looking at me going like this. Get it together.
Yeah. So what also, this is another question from Jacob. Jacob's out of Las Vegas, good friend of mine. He says, what was Woody Herman like? What was he like as a guy?
Chase was a lot of fun, and great player. Learned a lot from him, but he liked to have a good time, which sometimes the band would have it with him, and sometimes he'd be off all by himself having a good time. He might show up late to rehearsal, you know, and we'd all show up, and then an hour later we'd come back and see if he was still here. No, he would. So our rehearsals notoriously started late. And of course, Stan Kenton was very disciplined. Everything had the bus left on time, and Buddy's Rich was disciplined, left on time, checked out on time. And Woody let everybody fend for themselves. And he put pressure on you on the stand, but off the stand, he gave you the freedom to, and whereas like somebody like Buddy or Stan, you'd feel that pressure even if they were in a restaurant with you. Off the stand. So Woody gave you freedom to escape, but you had to do business on the stand, you know?
Yeah. So I heard Woody was the type of guy that he wouldn't get too close to you because he didn't know if you'd last long enough. I've heard that from John Thomas. He said he wouldn't get too friendly with you unless he knew you were going to be on there.
It took him about 6 weeks. In other words, he gave me a little bit longer than he would give most people, because he saw there was something there that I could maybe work up to. And after 6 weeks, he finally said, "You sound good." You know, I had no idea, but 6 weeks, it took him to warm up to me, you know. Wow. And it takes him. Sometimes he makes up his mind really quick with certain people, and other times he'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So it just depends on, he had his pets. Bill Chase was one of his pets. Birch Johnson was one of his pets. His favorite guys that he would like to hang out with and kind of talk with them socially outside the band and help them with whatever they were struggling with outside of music.
He rode with you in the car.
And he rode with us in a car one time when we took this is after I had left all the bands and I was living here in Kansas City, and we had just bought a new 84 Cutlass Sierra, and so here we are. I'm asked, one of the trumpet players left to get married, and I was going to be a sub playing third trumpet, I think, which was a book I hadn't played before. And or maybe it was second, I can't remember. But Byron Strickling was playing lead, and
Wow.
And Mark Lewis was playing in the section. Of course, his father Cappy played on one of the earlier history of Woody Herman bands. And so I got to sub. That's how I met Byron Strickling. And on the way to the gig, Bill Byrne would always find somebody to ride with, so Woody wouldn't have to ride the bus. So we hauled Woody to the next 3 jobs, and my wife helped me drive, and she got a speeding ticket, small town in Iowa, and she talked the officer out of a ticket, and I told Woody, I said, if that had been me, he would have given me a ticket. And I said to Woody, I said, we didn't even have to use your name, Woody. And Woody says, that's no good. Then they throw you in the tank.
That's funny. That's so cool. That's awesome. So I got another question. Like I said, I got a bunch of them here. So this one is from Patrick. Patrick is from Rhode Island. He's a professional trumpet player out of Rhode Island. He asks Jay, did you ever make a major mistake on stage with any of these name bands that you've been on? And if so, what did you do to kind of play it off? Like, did you ever make is there anything where you made a big mistake and you're like, okay, it happened, I'll just get through it?
I think I was so focused that if I made mistakes, they weren't major.
Yeah.
But after I left the band, I remember sitting in with Gary Hobbs and a band from Portland, Oregon, and I was playing lead in the band, and I was reading one of the charts that I knew, but on 2 separate lines is a 5-bar rest, and each line looks the same, and I skipped ahead a whole 8 measures, and the band wouldn't go with me. So I don't think that's one of the worst mistakes I ever made, but I don't think I ever made a major guffaw on the road bands. But here's a funny story. When we were recording the Roadfather album, we did it direct to disc, and which means we had to record a whole side, four tracks on one side nonstop with only 10 seconds between each track. By the time we got to the 4th track, we were pretty tired, and things were going really well. Al Vizzuti had this tremendous solo on the Fire Dance, which he wrote for himself.
Wow.
And then Mark Johnson had on the 4th tune, which I think, I'm not sure, it might have been that tune that you sent me of
Sunrise Lady?
Sunrise Lady, with featuring Bruce Johnstone and Birch Johnson and Dennis Dotson. But there was a fast switch between electric and upright bass, and Mark Johnson got tangled in the chords 2/3 of the way through the 4th take. And there was silence in the studio because everybody knew we were going to have to do the whole side again. And when we did it again, Al Vizzuti played even better the next time. And
wow.
We didn't do any more than 4 takes on any of those tracks. And each time Al got better and better. So Al was amazing. Al Vizzuti has the most respect of anybody I've ever worked with. He's just amazing. Another story of him, his first week on the band, he didn't make a mistake for an entire week. And then when he finally did make a mistake, everybody turned around in disbelief. And it turns out the part was written wrong and he read it right.
Wow.
But it
And
sounded like a mistake. So sometimes mistakes you can get away with. Sometimes they're very obvious. And if they're very obvious, Buddy Rich might respond with something like, well, you didn't have to get it all over me. Wipe yourself off.
I got another. This is from Johnny. Johnny's my buddy out of Boston. He asked, "Is there any plans for a Trace revisited concert anytime soon?"
No, because we've lost several more members. Gigi Shin passed away, and then a wonderful keyboard player who helped write Twinkles for Jerry Van Blair. Jerry was the fourth trumpet player who actually Bill wrote Bochawa for Jerry, and his nickname was Bo. And then the three soloists were Chase, Wally, Jan, and Jerry. And so that's where Bo stands for Jerry's nickname, Cha stands for Chase, and Wah stands for Wally. Those are the three soloists on that track. So Bochawa, that's how I always thought it was some kind of an Indian name or something, but no, it's names for three of the cats.
Wow. So no plans for any type of.
No, first reunion was the best. Eric Mia Cheryl was fantastic. And then the second reunion was at Boston. And Phil Porter was the keyboard player that passed away. And Eric was there, and Eric played probably even better, according to Jim Oates played. I didn't do the second one. I did the third one, which was in Minneapolis. And then I did one in California when they had a reunion of all the 1970s road bands. They had Buddy Rich reunion band, and Chuck Finley played in. They had a Woody Herman reunion band, and Bobby Shue played lead trumpet, and I tried to play the piccolo trumpet on Pavon and didn't do very well. And Bobby put his arm around me and said, "Nice try, kid." He didn't say that, just giving me support. He didn't say anything. He just said, good effort. And then who else in the trumpet section was Mike Bax and myself, Jim Oates, Carl Hufstetter, Steve Hufstetter, and Carl Saunders.
Wow.
Man, that was, so I got to meet Carl for the first time, and he was really, really a nice person to hang out with.
Easy, great. I got another question here, and like Jay, first of all, I want to thank you for your time, my friend. This is like a history lesson, man, and it's like when you left, I said this more than once. I said it's like talking to a library, but you can ask the book a question. I mean, you guys are living libraries, and and it's great. And,
that's a nice way to think about the history, but I learned a lot about jazz history when I started with listening in college to records, and learned about Chase and the history. And when I was with Woody, I learned about the earlier history of the band, and with Stan, all the cats that came through that band and all the different progressive periods that he went. He could have been a millionaire if he'd have stuck with anything, but he was always moving forward and abandoning a great idea, which didn't last that long. And he was always ahead of his time. Bill Chase was ahead of his time as a writer. His attempt at trying to be commercial probably got him in trouble with some pretty risque lyrics to some of the pop songs. But as a writer and a trumpet player and a musician, he was really great. And I learned a lot from him. And I learned a lot from all the cats I played with. I played in several great trumpet sections. And the current section I'm with, the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra right now, is with Bob Harvey and David Aberg, and Clint Ashlock is a trumpet player. He's the leader, but also Steve Malloy. Steve and Bob split the lead. I moved down to third chair 17 years ago when I started with that band. I was still playing lead in Broadway theater. But basically, I play lead in a couple of bands, but it's nothing as hard as the road bands that I played when I was more youthful.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to thank you for your time, and like I said, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. For
Well,
some of us,
thank you for asking. I'm honored to be a part of this. And if you want to hang out again sometime in the future, hopefully I'll be alert and well to respond and maybe recall some of the other. And thanks again to your students and to all the people who participated. It was wonderful hearing all your stories, um,
yeah.
and all your questions. And I appreciate it.
So just
Putting me
one more.
in touch, buddy.
I'm sorry.
I appreciate you putting me in touch with everybody.
Yeah. Oh, anytime. I got one more question for you, and then we'll call it a day. Okay.
Oh.
So here's the last question. This is from this is from my buddy Joe. Joe's a lead trumpet player out of New Orleans, and he asked, Jay, what trumpet do you play on now, and did you do a lot of equipment changes when you were going through these various bands?
I still play the same mouthpiece. When I was with Stan Kenton, John Harner played a 13A4A Schilke mouthpiece, and before that I was playing a Bach 3C on a Getzen trumpet, and then I switched to a Provence mouthpiece, and now I'm still playing the Schilke 14A4A gold plated, and I have 3 of them, one with the 26th throat, one with the 27th throat, and then a copy of the 27th throat. And the one I play lead on is the original 27, and the middle, a little bit darker than that is a copy, and the darkest is the 26th throat.
Mhm.
And the top 2 are the 27s are the ones I use the most often. Played a Getzen trumpet for 2 years with second trumpet with Stan Kenton. Then I switched to Colicchio to play lead on. Stayed with Colicchio all the way through Woody Herman and Buddy Rich. And then in 1984, I got my first Bach trumpet, which is a Model 37 lightweight. And it has a richer sound. It's freer blowing than Colicchio, but the Colicchio has a beautiful bright. They both have beautiful bright sounds, and the Bach's darker than the Colicchio, and I can get bright and dark on both these instruments. And I also have a C trumpet that I use for orchestral playing. That's a 239 large bore, and I have a Getzen piccolo that I use for weddings, or lead trumpet that has a double of flugelhorn and piccolo trumpet, and I have a Queenon flugel.
Wow.
I believe that answers the questions.
Well, Jay, again, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Jay, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your time, my friend.
Hey,
And,
it's nice to call you a friend. I feel like we're acquainted and we're friends now, and we could play in a section together with the right attitude. How about that?
There you go. So
Yeah.
thank you everybody for joining us, and just stay safe out there, and join us next Sunday. We will have our next guest. Jay, thank you for all you've done for trumpet players, my friend.
Thank you to all that participated, and thank you for this opportunity to visit with you. It's been a great pleasure.
All right, Jay, well, you enjoy the rest of your day, and tell Patrice thank you so much.
All right, and stay safe and wear that mask when you go out in public.
You got it, buddy.
No, you can't do it when you're playing trumpet. Next thing you know, somebody's going to invent a mask for a trumpet player.
Maybe.
And he'll get a patent on it and make a lot of money.
There you go. All right. See you later, Jay.
Joe.